Not recording. Okay. Again, before actually going through observables, I want to discuss a few things. So whenever you have a lot of messaging services, right? Like I have WhatsApp, you have iPhone, iMessages, and so on and so forth. So basically, whenever you're trying to send a message, or whenever you're trying to receive something back, right? If you're trying to send a message, so let's say you have your phone here, and let's say your phone, and you have another one down here. Let's say this is phone, yours, and this is a friend's phone. We're trying to communicate back and forth, right? So when you're trying to communicate, you would make sure that if you're trying to send a message, right? Like, let's say I'm trying to send a message like, hi, how are you, right? Something simple. When you're trying to send a message from your phone to another person's, your friends, what would happen is the results can vary, right? You wouldn't always get a response back. Sometimes you would get a response. Sometimes they would simply ignore, or so in this case, we have different responses back. So first thing is successful response, right? So in case of successful response, your friend may respond back saying, good, what's up, something like this, or how are you? So, and in certain situations, you may not get a response, or some situations, the message even won't be sent, right? You would get a message saying in your message, not delivered. So in cases you get a message not delivered, sort of, this is the error, right? There's something going on for the communication. In case of an error, you would try to send a response back, or you would try to not send a response, but you would try to send the message again, right? Or you can also, I mean, this is just as an example, or you may forget about it. And there can be a lot of other responses as well. So, and again, sometimes, right, you're trying to send a message saying, how are you? And let's say successful response is, I'm getting the message and then I'm getting that message instantly. Like I'm trying to send a message to my friend and I would get the response back like in less than a second or in a minute. And sometimes they may look at the message, or they received it, right? The message, but never responds, or takes a while to respond. Okay. In situations where I'm just sending a message like, how are you? You know, it's nothing important, but let's say I'm trying to send a message like SOS help, right? In these cases, right, you're trying to send a message to your friend's phone, and if you don't get a response back soon, right, you're trying to ask for a instant reply, like I need something right now. And sometimes it may take a while. In those cases, you either send the message again and again, or you would try to send it to a different person, right? So simply, depending on the situation, you can either get a successful response, or sometimes you will never get a response. Sometimes you may take some time to respond, in which case, in case of emergencies, you may want to contact someone else, right? So depending on the situation, you're trying to do something, and you're trying to send a message, and you're trying to expect a response back. Similar to what we have here, right? We're trying to send messages and trying to receive back something else. We have something similar in Angular as well. You would try to. I'm hearing an echo. Okay, so in Angular you have something similar where you would be trying to send some information, or you're trying to gain some attention or gain some data, get some data from a particular service. And okay, so in this example, my phone or whatever this is, you're an observer, right? So what you are is an observer, and you're trying to grab attention of someone else. You're trying to get some information back. It can be something simple as how are you, or you can also can be something like a help. So no matter what, you're trying to expect some response. Similar to what we have here in this situation, where you're trying to send some message and get something back, you have something similar in Angular as well. So you can, as we have explained before, so you're trying to send this, and in Angular, if you're trying to send a message from your application, similar to what we have before, you're the observer, or in this case, the Angular HTML page, or any of the Angular application is the observer. It is nothing but it's trying to get some data, and you're trying to get that data from a external service. In this case, in our example we have shown here, it's our friend's phone, but it can be a number of places, right? You don't always have to get data from your friend. You may send message to, like in cases of emergencies, right? You will be sending that message to, or making a call to 911, or you're trying to send a message or do something with your friend or your parent or someone else. But anyways, there are a lot of sources where you might be expecting a response. So in something similar in Angular, or you have from whomever you're trying to get a response back is an observable. So you are the observer, and the response where you're trying to get is an observable. But we're not just sending messages to our friends or something, but we're trying to get data back from someone else. It can be like a database. It can be HTTP requests. HTTP requests are something like get, post, put something. These are all HTTP requests. Or it can be some API call, right? Can be a lot of things, or it can be local data. So whatever you're trying to get information, right? Depending on whatever you're trying to get from the observable, again, similar to what you are getting back from the message before, can be a success, right? And here, I wouldn't say a success, but let's say I'm trying to get a data back. So I'm saying it handle data. There are different things which can happen. So I'm requesting some data, I'm getting back. I can get a handle data, or I can handle a error, right? So similar to here, I'm trying to send a message. I may get some error, or in some cases, the message may not be delivered, in which case depending on the situation, I may react differently again. And finally, handle completion. So depending on the situation, I would be requesting some data. Okay, this Angular application is the observer, and I'm trying to get a response, and that's an observable. It can be from any one of these. Again, these are all, again, most most of these calls would be asynchronous. I'm not saying all of them would be, but most of them would be asynchronous. Again, what do you mean by asynchronous, right? So I'm trying to send a request. When I define something as asynchronous, I can get it immediately, or it can take some time, in which case I have to wait again. So that is what asynchronous call is. Do you guys have any questions? Is this making sense at all? Or do you have any questions? What? Sorry.
No, Anvesh.
Oh, okay, cool. Sorry, I couldn't hear. So, so we have already created here an example, home. I have a home component, user1 and user2. Let's try to see how this actually works. Again, the observables, they are not part of Angular. You have to actually import that from RxJS. So if you look at package.json, you have a reference to RxJS. It's not a part of Angular, or it's not a standard JavaScript function or library. So in order to actually use any of these, you have to actually import that from RxJS. So that is one of the first things you have to do. Okay. Sorry. Did you guys hear that, or sorry if I was on mute? So let us first create a basic observable, and let's go with that one. And let me create a custom or observable first, so we can go through, or I'll show you in detail about how can we handle any of the events I was showing you before. So I can have any of these: handle data, handle error, or handle completion. Okay, let me do that in ng on init. Enter. In order to create that, again, as I mentioned, first thing you have to make sure that is I need to have a observable imported, and we have a method called create, and here I would be creating that particular again, you wouldn't typically create observables, but you would actually use it. It would already be created, or you would, whenever you're trying to access data, again, as I was showing you in our example down here, it's not always that you would create the observable, but you would try to make a call to a database, HTTP request, or any of those. And they would actually provide us the service, the observable service. But let us try to create the observable so we can actually see how it works. So let me create a simple example where it is actually trying to increase the count. So there is a simple function called setInterval where it would actually increase the value of whatever we have defined here. So after this, I'll show you guys how to actually embed syntax. So let me do one thing. I'll do this, copy paste it, and let's see. Okay. So what am I doing here? Server. Okay, so what setInterval does is automatically increments the count here whenever I say, or let me show you how it works. So whenever I'm in home page, let us do this. And it doesn't do anything. Sorry, guys. I have some. Let me actually, I should have done this before class. Okay. And I also need math. So let me also get that. Okay. Anyways, you see we have a lot of code here, but sorry. Okay. Okay. Anyways, so coming back to our here, I've created my own observable. Usually, you don't actually do that, as I mentioned. Whenever you're trying to subscribe or whenever you're trying to make a call to an external request, right, which is an observable, it would actually provide us all of these. Like it would provide us with, handle data, handle error, and handle completion. And basically, depending on however you get it, like sometimes you may get the data back, and sometimes you may get error. Depending on that, you would actually define whatever you want to do. Here, I've created an observable class, right? A simple observable class, which by using create. And here, I'm trying to pass our observer here is nothing but a variable which is simply whatever function or is calling the observable. So I can be the observer in this example again, and that is what I'm trying to pass here. Okay. Anyways, in the example I've created here, I have a count and I'm incrementing the count here for every 1 second. Whenever I use set interval, it does one thing simply. For every so and so seconds, whatever I define here, so and so milliseconds, like I'm saying 1000 milliseconds, it will actually execute a particular function here, whatever function I have here. Okay. So that is what a set interval. So for every 1 second, it does whatever I have down in this function in between these two curly braces. So that is what this is. But anyways, in here, what I'm trying to do is I'm incrementing the count, and once the count is equal to 5, I'm saying it is complete. And if the count is greater than 4, I'm throwing an error. Or let's say greater than 3, I'm throwing an error. This is what the observable does here. That is all it's trying to do. For every 1 second, it's trying to increment the counter. And whenever the counter is equal to 5, right, I'm trying to complete it. I'm trying to finish this one. But if it's greater than 3, I'm throwing an error. And this is not, again, a standard way of doing it. This is just an example, just to explain how the observers or observables can work. Is this confusing, or do you guys have any questions about any of these? Right now, I'm just creating an observable, nothing else. Okay. Anyways, in order to actually access any observable, right here, whenever I want to call an observable, right, like a external service, which is an asynchronous service, I actually have to subscribe to that observable. So I create an observable here, and I'm calling it custom interval observable. And if I want to access that, I always have to subscribe to that particular service, whatever it is. Subscribe means, in our case, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Is it for only custom observables or for even?
For any observables, I have to subscribe.
Okay.
Yes, sure. And I'll tell you why we need to do that. So since this is an asynchronous, as I mentioned, since this is an asynchronous call, I don't know when this would be finished, right? So whenever this is updated or whenever I'm trying to get a response back, right, I want to know about it. And that is why I have to subscribe to that observable. So subscription can be simply whenever you're trying to send a message, right? It's similar to notifications, whatever you see on your phones. So whenever you get a message from, let's say, WhatsApp, it can be Gmail or anything, you would get a notification. That is what a subscribe is here. So no matter what, your observable you're making a call to, sorry for that. Coming back to here, no matter what you're making a call to, you always subscribe because it's an asynchronous call. Since we don't know when you would get a response back, you would always subscribe to that. It's again similar to notifications, whatever you see on your phones. Do you have a question, Lakshmi?
So we are subscribing mainly for to send the notifications, right?
Yep. So whenever we get a response back, we want to be notified. So subscribe is nothing but notification. That is all it does. So I've described here what happens whenever we get data. So the first one is whenever I get a response back from that subscription. So right here, I'm saying, sorry, observer.next, and I'm updating the count here, right? That is all I'm trying to do. So whenever I'm saying dot next of count, I'm getting access to that. And this, whatever observable I've created, that is sending the notification back to our subscription. Whatever subscription we have, it is sending some message back, right? And that is what the data is for. So whenever there is an update here, right, for the count, I just get that, and I'm trying to log it here. So if I refresh this and let's say greater than 3, it's not console.log and something. One second. Okay. Just making sure I'm on the current project. So I don't see exactly what I'm expecting. Okay. Okay. Anyways, for some reason it got a different project. Anyways, so or it didn't update the data, I think. Or anyways, so if you look down here, it is whenever the data is right, I'm increasing the count here, and it's going on for every 1 second. It is incrementing the count by 1, and it's updating it to the observer. And I'm just logging it here. I'm saying console.log data. So here it started with 0, 1, 2, 3, and whenever it's greater than 3, right, I'm throwing an error. Let us so initially it's coming. Let me actually make this 10 just for the sake of explanation. And in here, all it's trying to do is increment the counter by 1 every 1 second. And that is what the data part is. So I'm trying to get whenever it's incrementing the counter by 1 for every 1 second, I'm showing the data down here. That is the first part I was explaining you. So how to handle the data. I'm just getting the data, how to handle it. I can handle it by saying subscribe, and within here, I would simply, look at it as I have 3 arguments I can pass whenever I do a subscribe. I would get 3 values. The first one is data. The second one is error. And the final one is completion. So whenever it's completed, right, I can access this. Again, I don't need to use this. I can actually skip these, right? So if I'm not subscribing to error, right, I wouldn't get any message down here. You can see it goes from 1 to 5, but it never errors out. But if I subscribe to this one, right, again, let's say instead of saying 3, now it goes from 1, 2, 3, 4, and after that, it simply says count is greater than 3, and it errors out. And it also prompts here because that is what I'm trying to do here. I'm showing an alert here. So whenever I subscribe to an observable, again, we are trying to create our own observable down here and trying to, subscribe to that particular example. I'll show another example if I'm subscribing to an external class, how that would actually look like. But anyways, in here, the first one part is I'm just trying to get whatever data it's trying to send. It's not when it's completed, but whatever data it's trying to get, I'm trying to console.log here. Again, I can subscribe to error, or I don't have to. If I want to handle the error, this is how I would do it. That is the second parameter here. And if I want to know when it's complete, right, observer.complete, whenever it's complete, I can also subscribe to that in the last one. So there are 3 values I get back whenever I subscribe to a particular observable. Depending on the situation, I can subscribe to any one of those, or I can just omit them. Is this confusing, or is this clear, or do you guys have any questions?
It's clear, Ranvish.
Okay, so I've shown you an example where we are trying to subscribe to our own observable, and we are trying to handle the data, right? We're just increasing the count, sending the data with next, or we are trying to handle we're throwing an error as we have shown here, or we also have a complete event whenever the count value is equal to 5. I'm just saying completed. Anyways, when we can increase that to 6 or anything you want. Let me show you another example where we would actually subscribe to an external data. Similar to what we have in observables, where we have an observable, we do that. There is another important concept in Angular. It's called services, right? Services are similar to, they're not similar to observables, but why do we define a service is whenever you're trying to access some data from an external, again, web page, or when trying to make a API request, API call, or it can be a DB call. Whenever we are trying to do any of one of these, or access local data. Like for example, I'm trying to access something from our cache. If we are trying to do one of these, there are different ways of doing it, right? Like I can, let's say, if I want to make a database call, I can write it here in the ng on edit. Maybe I'm just using this as a pseudocode. I'm not trying to write the actual code, but let's say make a call to DB, right? I can actually do that here, right? Within a home component.ts, or I can go to user component.ts. Again, make a database call here, another DB call. I can, let's say if I have 10 other components and I want to make a database call in those 10 components, I can do it in individual components. That is one way of doing it. But you don't want to, again, going through our programming principles, which is basically dry, which is simply says, don't repeat yourself, right? So by following that standard, you don't want to actually have a database call, making a database call in each one of these components, but you want to create another class where you would have all the logic. For example, if I'm making all the database calls, I want to make all the database calls within that particular class, right? Or if I'm trying to make an API call, I want to create another class and make all the calls within that class. So no matter what, I don't want to do all of that in one in individual components, but I just want to centralize that. So in order to do that, Angular provided us with something called services. So whenever we are trying to make an external call, you wouldn't actually call that or make that call within your individual methods or individual components, but you would actually create something called a service where you would make calls to our database. So in order to do that, in order to create a service again, either you can do it in the app root, or you can actually create a shared folder where you would create the service. Again, similar to others, we can also create the service using our CLI, using ng generate service and give it a name. So let's say I want to give it a name users. Since I have, let's say I'm trying to get value right here. If you look at our user component, I don't have much logic, right? I just have this root. But anyways, apart from that, I don't have any logic here where I'm trying to get data, user data from some other service. So let's create a service where we are trying to grab data from some other service or from some external data. So in order to do that, let us create a service for just the users. So ng generate service users. Once I do that, the Angular, my bad, I created it the wrong place. And, wait. Yep, it's at the right place. So I've created a service down here. Again, going through this one, when it created this one, its first thing it did is create export class, the name of the class, whatever service name, and users, since I said users and service. And you also see on the top of it, it decorated that with injectable provided in root. So this is, I wouldn't say this is, you wouldn't actually see the same syntax if you're working with the previous Angular version, but this is a new syntax. It simply says, this class is injectable. Do you guys know what injectable is, or any idea about it? So whenever I say a particular class is injectable, it simply says that I can actually use this within another component. by just passing it in the constructor down here. That is all I have to do if I want to use this particular class here. In simple terms, or it simply says that I can actually use that within another class, within another component, or anywhere by just simply mentioning. Let's say if I want to use it here, I would simply say user service, and the type is user, and I can actually use this particular. Lakshmi, you have a question?
Is it like inheritance, Anvesh?
It's not inheritance. Let me explain it another way. So whenever you want to use, let's say I've defined, let's say I've defined another class called user.ts, okay, with the right. If I want to use this particular class, let's say in user component.ts, how would I do that, right? I would first say that, and I would also say user equal to new user, right? Something like this, right? So in here, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to instantiate this user variable with user class, right? So I'm just saying user is of type whatever user is here. Let's say I have two properties here. First one is name, which is of type string, and another one which is ID, which is of type number. And I have these two. So if I want to instantiate user here, right, I need to do it in this way, right? I have to particularly specify user equal to new user. Only then it would instantiate or create a new or some space in the hard drive for our user. But using this one, if I want to, this is called injection. If I do it in this way, I don't actually have to instantiate it. That is the main difference. But it is instantiated by Angular itself. It does it automatically for us. So if I want to use this particular user service, I don't actually have to go here and say user service equal to new user service. I don't have to do this, but Angular automatically takes care of that. So that is the main difference between using, whenever I say injectable, it simply says that Angular is taking care of instantiating the class. I don't have to do anything. Do you know anything about dependency injection, or yeah? Anyways, so this is the same thing as dependency injection. So down here, I don't have to instantiate it. But if I say this class is injectable, and if I say provided in root, which is simply saying, usually I would go here providers and I would actually specify the service name. I don't have to do this if I specify it here itself. Anyways, long story short, using injectable means I don't have to instantiate it. That is all. The main difference between doing this one. And there are certain advantages of using injectables. One of them is, let's say down here in the constructor, I have another, let's say I have root, right? Let's say I have the same thing here. And even the activated root, whenever we are trying to use it here, right? this.root.params, just using it. I'm not trying to instantiate it, right? And if I want to instantiate it, there I may have to pass in some arguments. The main advantage of using injectables is I don't have to pass any arguments. Angular itself takes care of any arguments it needs and does that for us. So that is the advantage, or why we use injectables. Do you have any questions?
A little confusion between user.components, user.service, and user.ts. I mean, the relation between them.
So user.service is the service which we are defining here. I'll show you what we actually do in here. Whenever I'm defining a service, as I mentioned before, right? I try to access data. Think of it as a class where it tries to access any data I want to. It can be from a database. It can be like an API call or anything. If I want to do all of those, instead of writing it in individual components, I would make it central, somewhere common where everyone can have access to that. That is what the user.service.ts is. That is all it is. So this user service helps us to make a call to an external service. That is all it does. Well, user.ts, this one is a simple class where I've defined it to have two properties. One is name and ID. And user component.ts is nothing a component which we have defined. Service is nothing but an external or internal class which would make calls on our behalf, on behalf of any component. So instead of, let's say, running out of space, but okay, let's say this is our HTML page, and I have something down here, like a database, right? With some information in here, users data. Okay. One way of doing it is, one way of making a call is directly making a call from our HTML page to, users data, right? Let's say I don't have one. Okay, let's say this is one component. One. Let's say I have another component as well. And another third component as well. All of them need to have access to, DB. So I can make individual calls like this to our database, right? I can do this, but we would have repeating logic in all of these components just to make the same call to our users data or our database. Instead of doing that, what we would do is, instead of making multiple calls to that, we would use this centralized one. So all the calls I would make, I would just make it to our service down here. Mauri, do you have something to add? Or?
No, I was just telling the service.
Okay. Yep. So I have the service down here. So instead of trying to create all our logic in individual components, I would just have it at one place called service, right? Here, I would have all the logic. Making PV calls. And this one would actually, on behalf of all these components, it would just make the call to our database. And it would get back our response and also updates our components, individual components. So that is what the service users.service.ts is for. So once I actually create some methods in here, you would actually see, okay, this is what it's doing. So that is what a service is for. Again, it doesn't have to be a database call. It can be any other call. It can be an API call or a HTTP request or anything. We would just, instead of creating it in individual components, I would just create one central component called service or class called service. Is that clear? Or
Yes, Anvesh.
okay. And you also asked what user is. So user is nothing but an object where I have two parameters. One is name, which is of type string. Another one is ID, which is of type number. That is all it is. So when I'm trying to get data back from users data table, those all would be of type user. So right now I just have name and ID. Okay. So in order to get data from our service, let me create methods for that. So first one, I would simply create a get users. Okay. And it is getting us data, which is of type user. Since this is a user's type, I'm trying to get an array, not just one value. Okay. Okay. Even before doing that, let me also create another class. I'll explain you why we have another class. So in here, let's say export class users data. Again, this is how most of the places you would do it in the same way. You would have a central service, and that would make a call to our database or anything. Since I already have, okay, let me copy paste our data. And okay, name. Okay, all I'm trying to do in here, I'm trying to create some mock data where I'm trying to get data from get users, which would get, 3 records for us with IDs 1, 2, and 3. That is what this class is for. That is all it's doing. Just creating some mock data in here, right? The 3 records, and I'm returning that data. So let's assume this is actually like a database, right? So in order to get data, let's say from database, in our case, it's just a mock class. Let us equal to new users data. And return users dot get users, right? That is all I have. And in our Going back to users, okay, in HTML, let me create a simple button, which is of class btn, and just to make it really pretty, let's say get users data. Okay, and again, we can have our standard logic where, let me first define user, but I want multiple users. So let's say users, and which is of type an array of users. Okay, that is all it's trying to do. And when I click on this button, let me define a function. Click equal to, let's say get user info, or let us define this function in our TypeScript here, right? So what I'm trying to do is I've created a button where I'm saying get users data, and when I click on that, I'm trying to get some data. Again, I would try to get that data from our user service.ts, right? I just want to get that data from that particular centralized place. So in our example, I'm only showing you one component where it's trying to get data from our user service. But in typical situations, whenever you're working on a project, you can have multiple components. There would be 10 different components calling the same service, but we're just doing it for one. But anyways, so in order to get that, again, I'm injecting that service here, right? Private user service and user service of type user service. And I can simply say this start get users, right? The first thing is I'm trying to get users, but I don't want to just do that, right? I want to assign it to users. So I will simply say this start users equal to so and so. And in our user component, I would get that data, but let us also display it. So let me do that. And this would be lowercase. I have a component where I've defined users, and I'm trying to display it in our HTML page by looping it through it. So going back to our example down here, get users data, and it is getting, there might be an error, but anyways, it's getting 3 records for us. So this is what services are for. So I would simply, it's doing nothing complicated. It's trying to go to this method, right? And this method is, let's say, this is a database call. Even though this is mock data, let's say database call. That is all it's trying to do. It's trying to get data from our database. Any questions about what the service is doing or what we're trying to do down here? In our example, whatever we are showing in here, whenever I'm saying get users, let's say down here, I'm getting it pretty much quickly, right? But in regular scenarios, whenever I'm trying to make a call to database, I wouldn't get it immediately, right? It would take some time to get it, right? So similar to that, let's make this more in that way. So whenever we know we are trying to make a call, right, to like a database or HTTP request or something, which we think may take time, it's best to use observable, right? That is what the observable is for. So let us make use of observable down here, and let's see how that would change. It's not much different again. Get users. But let's say I'm using observable. The name of the function itself is that way. And instead of getting regular user data, I'm trying to get observable user data. And you would also see how that would actually change our call to this particular service. So users would be, again, the same thing. I'm doing that. But instead of returning the data, I'm typecasting that now. So once I say off, which is also of type RxJS, now the data is not regular data, but it's type observable. So that is all I'm trying to do. Again, whenever I'm making a database call, this wouldn't be the case. I wouldn't actually use off, but it would be however the call needs to be made. Mauni, I have a question for you. So do you guys make database calls directly from your Angular application, or do you make a external API call, or how do you do it?
Yeah, we'll make the external API call.
Okay, not directly from
No.
Angular, right? Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So again, Lakshmi, some cases, it's not usually database calls are not made from our Angular application, but we would use an API where they would actually make a call to database. So anyways, you can think this as a call to database or to an API. There are ways of making database calls from Angular, but that is not typically the case. In most of the cases, you would make an API call. That is what we do as well. Anyways, so let's say instead earlier we're getting the information directly, but usually that is not the case. That is why we are typecasting it to observable. And let's say API call, which is this is for this one. Which returns or information. So that is all I'm trying to do. And let's say I'm trying to get observable user, based on that, how this would change. It's not much different. Earlier, I was explaining you, right? I would make the same call, right? But instead of getting users, now I'm making call to get users observable. So when I make a call to observable, I cannot directly get it, but I have to use a subscription, right? So simply I would say subscribe, and here I have to say what value I'm trying to get, similar to here, right? If I want to get some data, I would specify that. Similar to that, I would simply say users. I want to get data in form of a user, and I would do this. Sorry, I cannot actually assign that. So I can only assign it within that function. So I would simply say users equal to whatever information I'm getting back from our observable down here, which is user array, right? That is what I'm trying to get back. It's same as a regular call to a function. The only difference is if I'm trying to get observables, I have to subscribe to that. That is the main difference. If I want to handle error, again, simply I would do that. Again, you can see, and here it says error. If I have an error, what I want to do, right? So if I want to define that, again, simply I would say error. Again, if I want to handle the error here, I would simply say, if I want to just console.log here, I would say, if I want to log the error, I would simply say log that console.log error, right? If I know, if I'm trying to expect if error equal to, let's say, if I have something, I may want to handle it in a different way. But anyways, so it's not much different. Again, when we have an observable, all we have to do is subscribe. And if I want to access the data, that would be the first one. If I want to get access to error, that would be the second one. And similar to what we have defined in component.ts here. So is that clear? Any questions about any of these? These are two really important concepts. One is observable, another one is service. Most of the data calls, whatever we do, we always use these two. We create a service. Most of the data which we get back are observables, and we would try to subscribe to those and try to access that data. Anyways, with that change made, let us go back to our function again. Click on that. I'm still getting data. I think I'm doing something wrong when I do this here. Even though I'm trying to pass 3 values. Anyways, long story short, do you have any questions? Or
No.
okay. Okay. So yeah, this is all there is to observables and also services. Again, whenever we are trying to access any asynchronous data, we try to use observables. Examples would be making calls to database or HTTP requests or API call or any other thing. Whenever it's asynchronous, I would try to use that observables, and I can have three ways of accessing data. If I want to get just access the data, I would just put that. If I know or if I want to handle any errors I have, there is another way, and or if I want to handle completion. And services are centralized way of doing making calls. It can be a database calls or API calls or anything. So these go hand in hand, actually, services and observables. So okay, if you guys don't have any questions, that is all for these two topics. I will. I have one more class tomorrow. That would be the end of it, and I would be discussing about forms. In particular, we would be using Angular components. I would go through all of those. It's called material components, material inputs. So instead of having regular sort of input, I would have math added in front of everything. So I would discuss in brief about material components and also go through Angular forms. And yeah. Okay. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow then. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.